Lost in translation, Tom's frustration. Can't find the groove, he needs a revelation. Audience drifting, they feel it in him now. He wonders why, but can't figure out how. Back in the day, he had them in the palm of his hand. Jokes hitting hard, they would always understand. But times have changed, the humor's taken a shift. Tom's left behind, his act needs a swift lift. Can't blame the crowd, they're just moving along, seeking something fresh that resonates, feels strong. Tom Segura once the voice of the masses, but now he's stumbling, his jokes lost, fumbling. Back in the day, the crowd, they're just moving along, seeking something fresh that resonates, feels strong. Tom Segura once the voice of the masses, but now he's stumbling, his jokes lost, fumbling.
Welcome to Podcast. Thank you for joining us. This is your host, Lily Abernathy. Episode 6. Tom Segura is lost in translation. Tom Segura, businessman, ex-fat guy, former funny person, privileged, tactless. My first experience with Tom Segura must have been in 2014 during his completely normal tour, in a comedy club that is part of a hotel in the very unique city of Jacksonville, Florida. Up to this point, I'm not sure if I was aware of who Mr. Segura was. When asked by the same friend mentioned in my Skankfest story from the last episode, if I wanted to go to the show, I replied, "The guy who voices the weird kid on Bob's Burgers." As it turns out, Mr. Segura was not Eugene Merman, and they are actually not related at all. I would be lying if I said that the show wasn't enjoyable. Because of this show, I would become aware of Tom's podcast titled Your Mum's House, co-hosted by his wife, Christina P. Now, I would like to point out that even though I enjoyed the comedy show, Tom has never been remotely someone I would consider a top-tier comedian, nor do I think his podcast, Your Mum's House, is anything to rave about, and I basically never watched it until they eventually started having guests on. Even then, I would only tune in if I was interested in the guest and skip the portion where it's just a husband and wife doing Tosh.0 poorly. Genuinely, who wants to watch a husband and wife version of Tosh.0 or ridiculousness? Fucking shoot me. Now, at this time in 2014, Tom was fat. Tom was lazy. Tom seemed like your average American guy just trying to get by representing the common man as a stand-up comedian. Tom, up until this point, only had 2 comedy albums released. The first and less popular, Thrilled, and the more popular, White Girls with Cornrows. Tom, later in 2014, would film the act I saw him perform for one of Netflix's early comedy specials. The special seemed to be a fruitful endeavour for both Segura and Netflix, because Tom's next 4 specials would all be released on the platform. Over the next 10 years, Tom would regularly show up in my life in a number of different ways, but mostly in the form of podcasts. Tom, who was a friend of Joe Rogan and is a part of their Sober October crew, was regularly featured on the Joe Rogan Experience as it was skyrocketing to fame. Tom was and is regularly touted by Rogan as one of the best stand-up comedians to ever do it. Now remember, there are only a handful of professional comedians according to Rogan, less than 250 probably, actually less than 100 probably, and they all work at the comedy mothership in Austin, Texas, the Los Angeles of Texas. And why should anybody question Joe Rogan? He only has the biggest podcast in the world and is one of the top-paid touring arena acts. Surely he knows what he is talking about. Look at all the talent he has promoted before, like Whitney Cummings, Brendan Schwab, Tom Papa, Akash Singh, Tony Hinchcliffe, David Lucas, Stavros, Brian Callen, Howie Mandel, Steve O, Fahim Anwar, and Jimmy Dore, to name a few. So, why would people like Tom or Bert be any different, honestly? Tom, over the course of the 10 years since I first saw him, would regularly promote himself as the everyman figure. But as it turns out, he was a bit more privileged than the everyman for most of his life. Tom's father was a vice president of famous wealth and financial company Merrill Lynch, whom he worked for 41 years, starting in Tom's birth city of Cincinnati, Ohio. With one simple fact, many of Tom's stories can be seen in a different light. Tom is often referred to as a dark and edgy comedian, but honestly, he only comes off this way to the boomer generation. Many of Tom's thoughts and bits are commonplace amongst any group of guy friends. If anything, Tom is a businessman more than a comedian, and this is why he currently does not understand the situation both him and business partner Bert Kreischer are experiencing. Tom's origin in Hollywood started with him doing production on TV shows, and he had no real interest in being a stand-up. In fact, his first attempt was given to him based off of a lie. Within the last year or so, Tom and Bert, hosts of the popular Two Bears, One Cave podcast, have been receiving a bit of negative backlash from their fans. They do not seem to be reacting to it well, and it may show a bit more on Bert publicly. But this situation clearly irritates Tom as well. Both of them have been on such an upward trajectory that has created several business opportunities that they currently make millions just off of advertising and promotions, let alone all their other ventures like tours, merch, and podcasting. They have both become parodies of themselves and are simply business entities at this point. Tom's last special, which was filmed in the round, a terrible move and should never be done for any special, was complete ass. Does extreme drop in humour and all the hate have anything to do with the fact that Tom's new leisure activities include piloting, race car driving, and creating a cheap vodka to advertise as something fancy to scam his fans out of their money? Probably. Does it have to do with the fact that he has for years now been calling people paws and making fun of disabled people, but actually comes from a privileged background, and maybe the more people are finding out about it, they are realising it is less of a joke and just being an asshole? Probably. Ever since Amico dropped Two Bears, One Grave, Tom and Bert have been on high alert. Bert being called out on Legion of Skanks by Ari Shaffir, publicly making them aware of just how serious the hate is. While listening to another podcast featuring two big producers in the podcasting industry talking about how every comedian has alt Twitter accounts they use, I decided to test something. I jokingly reached out to a number of people I know work for Your Mum's House Studios with an offer to pay them for any information relating to Bert or Tom's alternate Twitter accounts, only to be met with a message from a throwaway account telling me to contact them on the secure app known as Telegram, and quickly deleted the account roughly 2 hours later. Luckily, I obtained the Telegram number and have verified that the person does in fact work for YMH Studios. We are currently brokering a deal. There have also been some recent changes to the YMH network. Their main producer Nadav left the network within the last year without any real explanation. Dr. Drew no longer does his show on the network. Tom's wife, Christina, has put her solo podcast on indefinite hiatus. Maybe people didn't notice this next one as much, but during a recent Joe Rogan Experience episode featuring the Protect Our Parks crew, Ari Shaffir announced that he would have a new podcast releasing on YMH Network. To my surprise, Joe Rogan, while under the influence of drugs and alcohol, reacted in a way I did not expect. While happy for Ari, he seemed to reiterate more than once that the podcast should not have been done on a network and should have been released by Ari on his own. I find this very weird considering how much Joe has supported both Tom and YMH in the past. Maybe I'm reading into it too much with the Joe Rogan comment, but I do believe there is something else going on with Tom behind the scenes. As mentioned before, I consider Tom a businessman more than a comedian. Tom has always understood things like how to merchandise, advertise, and network yourself properly. I couldn't imagine where Tom could have learned these skills from, but I'm sure it was just God-given talent and had nothing to do with his upbringing or the opportunities made available to him by his father. Speaking of networking and advertising, let's talk about how Tom has basically used other people to build his podcasting empire. Your Mum's House was originally produced by Brian Redban of JRE and Kill Tony fame. Since no one can stand Redban because he's a talentless hack, they eventually got their new producer in the form of Blueban, otherwise known as Nadav. Nadav may as well be the Ben Avery to Your Mum's House's Tim Dillon. Since leaving the show, there has been numerous mentions of how the quality of something that was already trash has dropped even further. From there, the podcast would grow and flourish, where Tom would hire artists, some famous, like Jeremy Fish, to help build his merchandising kingdom to sell limited edition clothing in the vein of Supreme. Reaching a level of success, Tom would expand the show into a full studio instead of a bedroom experiment, where more producers would be hired like some dude who only shits every 2 weeks. They would start to expand with other podcasts around this time. The first of the new podcasts included his wife with her show Where My Mum's At, followed by The Honeydew with Ryan Sickler. Sickler has since left the network. The next show to enter the network would be Two Bears, One Cave. The premise of this show is Tom letting Bert ramble for an hour or so you can see how retarded he is. Dr. Drew would soon join the network thereafter with a show in the style of his former radio show, Loveline. Dr. Drew is no longer on the network at this time. During 2020, the pandemic would arrive and cause a shift in the LA comedy community. Many of them would leave to follow Joe Rogan to Austin, Texas. Tom and his shows would also move to Texas, where they would have their own studio and continue to expand. The next show to be added to the network would be The Danny Brown Show, followed by First Date starring Lauren Compton. We did not know Ms. Compton was actually a comedian until Amico released the song You Will Never Be a Comic. It has also been speculated that the only reason she has a show on the network is because she has been sleeping with the boss. The final and current podcast to join the network is the previously mentioned Ari Shaffir travel podcast titled You Be Trippin'. I truly believe that the only comedic value Tom has tried to add to his podcasting empire is pretending to be an edgy and dark Daniel Tosh. I wouldn't expect Tom or Bert to understand all the hate they are getting honestly, especially given their privileged upbringings. The fact of the matter is, they're both pretenders, Tom more than Bert. They were never really relatable. It was all an elaborate grift that seems to be falling apart. We would like to give a special shout-out to the Legion of Skanks for allowing us to watch the live stream recording of this week's episode, premiering tonight, May 3rd, on Gas Digital Network. We hope this is the beginning of a beautiful relationship between us and leads to a collaboration with both us and Robbie at Skankfest. This week's episode is brought to you by the secret informant from Your Mum's House Network. They asked us if we could do an outro song about Tom's secret addiction. Please enjoy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast. Follow us at Podcast the Pod on X, formerly Twitter. This has been Lily Abernathy, signing off.
Tom Segura, funny now, a joke say you say it, there's a secret he's been hiding, and it's time to spill the grit. It's not drugs or alcohol that Tom can't resist. It's a juicy pie that's got him in its twist. Asian hoes Tom can't resist. He'll eat them till he's stuffed, that's no bluff. From New York to LA, he'll hunt down the best. Tom's Asian addiction, it's put to the test. He'll take it thick or thin. Tom's love for hoes, it reaches for the sky. When Asian box is on the table, Tom's ready to inhale. Asian hoes